On this episode of The Darker Side of Boxing, we're discussing a fighter who was ferocious outside of the ring as he was inside of the ring. Came very close to fighting the great Roberto Duran, but that all went flat on its face on one heinous night in 1982. This is the life, the times, and the crimes of Tony Ayala Jr. Welcome once again, fight fans, to another episode of The Darker Side of Boxing with me, your host Sean Bastow, as always, joined by Johnston Brown for yet another compelling tale, another grisly tale, a gruesome tale. Well, of course, it's The Darker Side of Boxing. What else do you expect from us? But this is a story, to be honest with you guys, I didn't know too much about before doing the research for it. And when doing the research for this particular episode, I started to get the attention of some of these stories, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, how have I never heard this story before? What the hell was going on? Tony Ayala Jr., what the hell? I never even heard it. And when it was brought to light, when this episode was commissioned and we started to do the research, Johnston, you start to really get engrossed in what you're doing, and you think to yourself, I never really heard of it, but man, this guy, what the fuck is he on? This guy's a scumbag.
Oh, just a bit, mate. He's worse than that. He's an absolute travesty of a person. I mean, I can't even tell you how sickening this geezer makes me feel at times when we was doing the research and some of the stories that we're going to bring to light. And oh, wow, it really is a darker side of boxing. He epitomises the show, let's be honest. And for those that have been listening and hopefully on most of our episodes, we're going to go back to the grisly. I mean, it was grisly. It's always grisly, but this is a slightly different style. There's not murder. That's about as much as I'm going to say. But it is tragic and just... if you like this guy by the end of this, I'll be very surprised.
Well, that's certainly one way to set the scene for this particular episode. Well, of course, then what we'll always do is we'll put a bit of context to why we're saying it's going to be such a grisly episode and why we think it's such a gruesome tale to tell. Now, we're talking, of course, about Tony Ayala Jr. Now, if nobody's ever heard of him, he was a professional boxer coming up through the late 70s and 1980s before certain incidents happened which led to a downward spiral, and then an upturn in his fortunes, and then a downturn in his fortunes. And of course, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning, really, to be able to tell the story of how it all came about. Now, on February the 13th, 1963, Antonio Jr. Ayala was born in San Antonio, Texas. Now, they were a boxing family, the Ayalas, with Tony Ayala Sr. being a former fighter himself who actually had to stop boxing to go to work and provide for his family, as you would. Now, he was also an ex-Marine. Ayala Sr. trained and managed all of his sons. The oldest and former World Super Bantamweight title challenger, Mike Ayala. The second oldest was also a former light welterweight contender, Sammy Ayala. And of course, the story that we're telling today is about Tony Ayala Jr. Now, other fighters Ayala Sr. trained included the former World Super Bantamweight champion Jesse Benavidez, former World Super Featherweight title challenger Joe Morales, and Tony's third brother, Paulie, the youngest, began his pro career as a featherweight in 1984 and was a successful amateur who went on to win his share of pro fights. So, the Ayala family then, in a nutshell, a massive boxing family, all about boxing challengers, boxing champions. Boxing was basically in the Ayala blood.
It certainly was, and it just run through the family. And Senior clearly wanted to make sure the family were all involved in boxing. And Tony Ayala Senior was a strict disciplinarian, and he would actually lash the kids with jump ropes when they misbehaved. He wanted his four boys to be able to defend themselves and chose to take his boys out of school early so he could teach them how to fight and how to be tough. He started teaching them to box in his backyard with kids joining in, and before he knew it, he had literally a full boxing a stable, if you like, of all these young kids. And Senior was hard on his kids, and that was evidence when Tony Ayala Jr. once said, and again, this is a quote from him, he said, "Dad might squeeze my thigh or Sammy's or Mike's and say willpower and see how much pain we could take. Mike Ayala also admitted a hard upbringing. We grew up, so this is Mike Nay's brother, he said, we grew up tough. We were fighting grown men when we were just kids. We were young and crazy. We had a motto, beers, brawls and broads, and we had no fear.
And Senior would then drive his boys from tournament to tournament in a beat-up wagon across Texas with all the younger kids accompanying him. Now, when they were children, the Ayala boys would appear as between-fight entertainment at the professional bouts that they would go to, where they would fight each other. Now, it was a way for Tony Senior to obviously promote his kids and let people see how good and what sort of talent he had in his stable. Now, Ayala Jr. described his father's bad parenting skills to Phil Berger of the New York Times, and in his own words he said, "Once he lined us up and gave us each a bite of a raw jalapeno pepper to see if we're man enough to stand the burning it caused in our mouths. Mike ran to the bathroom, but me and Sammy stayed the course. The thing about my father, though, is he wouldn't ask us to do anything he wouldn't do first. He'd eat jalapeno pepper before making us try it. And the same with pinching. He'd have us pinch him as hard as we could. See that, he'd say, now it's my turn. Men don't cry. Willpower. Willpower."
What a fucking absolute scumbag. I'm laughing. It is just, it's dreadful parenting. What the hell? I mean, the fact that he's trying to turn around and say that, my father would do it before he would get us involved, but these were young boys. That's just not good. It really is. And then now in the book, which is Sporting Blood, which is written by Carlos Acevedo, he summed up Tony Ayala as a fighter and as a person perfectly when he wrote, Ayala represented the dark side of boxing, one that has its own twisted appeal, the burning of margins between blood sport and blood thirst. Now, his aggression would have no doubt surfaced because at a very young age, he had a horrific encounter with a family friend and he was actually molested physically between the ages of 9 and 11.
Wow.
Now, Ayala Jr. did tell Sports Illustrated, and this is again in his words, he said, at 7 or 8 or 9, I was the victim of another person's sickness. It lasted a year or two. I spent many years denying and chasing it away. I can't give you a lot of details. I know who the person was and what he did. Most of the details I chased out of my mind. I guess it was my way of surviving those years. As a child, I blamed myself for what happened to me. I thought what happened because I was bad and ugly, not man enough. That mentality grew as I grew older. I mean, wow. Absolutely devastating for a very young child of that age to have to have gone through that. And secretly as well, no one knew about it. This didn't actually come out until sort of a few years later. So awful.
Well, it certainly makes you then think about the story as we know it a little bit later on, and it starts to make me think straight away that obviously this is a huge mental and physical impact on his life and his career. And I think it would be quite evident when we tell this story a little bit later on. This has got a pivotal part to play in his life. Now, even with his flaws, and by God there were several, Tony Ayala Sr. did work tirelessly to keep food on the table for his family and blamed that reason for not noticing that Tony was being abused. He actually told Texas Monthly, "It breaks my heart. I never knew about the abuse my son endured. I don't know how we can make things right. I told him, Tony, there's nothing we can do. Just go forward." He then went on to say, "One time, my oldest son said, 'Where were you when all these things began?' My wife and I sat down. When you don't have an education and your income is low and you have to pay rent and you've got kids, you hold many jobs. I washed cars, I changed tyres, I worked in restaurants. I used to go to the farms and buy fresh eggs and sell them out of my pickup on the west side. I was always working. That's where I was. I wish I could have brought them up in a better neighbourhood. But it wasn't until the rich kids on the north side started using the drugs, and that got us excited then, because then we had a war on the drugs." So straight away, again, you hear the stories and you hear the things that are coming out of Ayala Senior's mouth. It kind of feels like he's kind of trying to point the finger in different directions here about his son getting abused. He was basically too busy to be able to see what was going on right in front of his face. And that's the impression I got when I first read that quotation from Ayala Senior, was that he's blaming everything else, the circumstances surrounding his life, saying that he was too busy doing this, that, and the other to be able to see what was going on in front of his face, which is really sad to hear, to be honest with you. It's like he's trying to justify, in a weird way, what had happened to his son by saying, well, it's kind of not my fault. This is why it happened, because I wasn't there to see it, because I was doing X, Y, and Z. It's not the way to kind of go about things, in my eyes. As a parent ourselves, I think we both know that you can't not blame anything else or anybody else but yourself, because you're the ones that are there for them all the time. And unfortunately for Tony Ayala Jr., Ayala Sr. just wasn't there when he needed him.
No, I mean, he did seem, he seemed to have a bit of time to line them up and give them jalapenos and see how tough they are, and willpower, and tell them how they need to be macho. And that was the environment he brought his kids up in, which probably had a downside spiral in terms of the fact that that's probably why Tony Ayala Jr. didn't speak up when he was going through it for those 2 years. He's blaming society and the community they were living in, but you've got to take, he understands you've got to work jobs, you've got to feed the kids. I get it. But we're parents. There's no way. I would know straight away if something dreadful like that happened. I believe I would. I think the child would be withdrawn, and obviously he didn't notice it. Tony Ayala Sr. did actually earn the community's respect and affection for the credit that he had brought to their young people and the city of San Antonio. Because San Antonio wasn't really a boxing state, and they didn't have many fighters. And for what he did, it got behind it. They liked that. But in others, the Ayala boys succeeded in the ring because they felt that the reason why they succeeded was their father raised them like dogs in the backyard. Someone actually said that he raised them like pit bulls, to be exact. And in the Texas Monthly article by Jan Reed in 2000, he actually wrote that, again, we just mentioned the molestation. Now, by 12, Tony has said he was smoking dope, boozing, and using heroin at 12 years old. Yet at 14, he volunteered to spar with the world welterweight champion, Pepino Cuevas, a superb fighter who was notoriously hard on his partners. Now, Cuevas snarled that he wasn't going to take it easy on Tony Jr. just because he was a kid. Now, the rumour is the kid knocked him on his can, as he says in this quote, Jam Reed. And the legend has it that Cuevas had to be assisted from the ring. So there's an indication there of what sort of guy Tony Ayala Jr. was like in the ring. And the fact that he's actually smoking dope, boozing, and on heroin at such a young age is, wow. I mean, clearly Senior and his mother are obviously not taking much notice on what's going on in his life.
Well, they're certainly oblivious to it, that's for sure, because he continued with his drinking and shooting up heroin, probably to black out the abuse that he'd suffered as a child. So it was inevitable that at just 15 years of age, his violent tendencies came to the surface. That fatal moment happened on December the 23rd, 1978, at a drive-in theatre toilet in his hometown of San Antonio, Texas, when Ayala Jr. was arrested for beating the shit out of an 18-year-old girl, repeatedly smashing her head against a toilet seat, and she suffered internal injuries from the savage attack because he just took all his anger out on this poor girl. Clearly, this repressed anger, this repressed abuse, everything that had happened to him seemed to have come out in this one night in 1978.
Incredible. 15 years old. And he's absolutely beating the living crap out of this poor young girl. And it was actually an attempted rape as well. Absolutely dreadful. And while this case was actually pending, Tony Ayala was actually allowed to continue his boxing career. And he took home the Golden Gloves middleweight crown in 1979, following in the footsteps of his brothers, Mike, who won the Golden Gloves flyweight championship in 1973, and Sammy, who won the Golden Gloves at lightweight 2 years earlier. So even with all this hanging over him, he's managed to continue his career and pick up a Golden Gloves. I mean, and this kid's 15 years old, and already we're picking up just the environment that this kid was living in.
Now, it wasn't until 1980 that his lingering aggravated rape charge was heard in court, where he was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to aggravated assault. On appeal and release on a $10,000 bail, Ayala had 10 days to file for a retrial. During that period, the 18-year-old victim accepted $40,000 with the agreement that she pled for leniency on her attacker, which she did, and Ayala's sentence was overturned to 10 years probation instead. Now, John Whistler, a long-time San Antonio Express news boxing writer, said, "He was a phenom, and they just protected his career, even the local judges."
Well, as I just said, I mean, San Antonio weren't very known for their boxers, and this kid at 15 years old was already turning heads, and he was clearly a talent. And you could see that the network that surrounded him were able to hand over $40,000. I mean, if the dad's scrimping and saving to try and put food on the table, it certainly didn't come from his pocket. So whoever was backing Junior at the time, they knew that this kid had talent. And irrelevant what the situation was, if this had been a normal guy at 15 years old, he was actually trialled as an adult as well, he would have never have got away with this. He would have gone down 10 years in prison straight up. There would have been no bollocks about it. And, you know, we know that from looking at other stories in America. Now, Lester Bedford, a Texas boxing event producer and promoter who worked with Ayala, agreed with Whistler. And he said, the Spurs, as in the San Antonio Spurs basketball team, weren't that big then. Boxing was really the sport, and Ayala was just a monster attraction. Everywhere he fought, he was a headline story. This was a once-in-a-generation fighter, maybe a once-in-a-lifetime fighter, and it was playing out right there in San Antonio.
Now, Tony Sr. even told the Dallas Times-Herald, "We paid a large amount of money to get out of it. I won't say how much, but Bob Arum needed a commitment from us for television." Bob, I wasn't lying yesterday, Arum. So he says, pay the damn girl off. We paid X amount of dollars, and that's actually all they were looking for. So that quote right there kind of says to you that what you was talking about a little bit earlier about who was putting this money up. Well, I think it's quite evident who was putting this money up, but it wasn't said at the time who was putting this money up. And I'm laughing because we just kind of know how these names keep cropping up all the time in this series. People like Don King, people like Bob Arum, they're always involved in some way, shape or form, because these type of promoters always saw talented fighters like Tony Ayala Jr. and they wanted to make a shitload of money of them. So they would do what they could to get them in the ring, because they knew if they could invest that, well, as far as they're concerned, if they're investing that $40,000 to pay off their court case, they could probably make treble that amount by getting him in the ring, because these fighters were such star attractions. Now, in a common trend for the Ayalas, the other brothers also got themselves into trouble with the law. Sammy was known to be an insane driver who hurt himself in an accident once, and in 1977, Mike was put on a 10-year probation for shooting another boxer. He was also on heroin when he fought for the WBA featherweight title that same year against Danny Lopez. So we're starting to see there's a bit of a pattern here. At first you start to think that the brothers have kind of escaped the shit that have gone on in their childhood. It's quite evident here that all that shit, eating jalapenos, being forced to go down that disciplinarian route, is starting to have a bit of an effect in their teenage to adult lives.
Absolutely, and that's a story I did know about with Mikey Ayala and the Danny Lopez fight. That was actually a really great fight as well. And the fact, again, he's on heroin. I mean, heroin is the drug, in my eyes, that you take and you just lay on the sofa. These guys are taking heroin and boxing. It blows my mind. God knows what the heroin was doing to theirs. And, well, anyway, Ayala Jr. fought his first professional fight at 17 years old against a guy called Zip Castillo, who was 24, 15 and 1 at the Royal Palace Ballroom in San Antonio on June 17, 1981, knocking him out in the first round, of course. Now, standing 5'7.5" with a 68-inch reach and an orthodox stance, El Toronto was his nickname, beat his first four opponents with decisive knockouts. His win and knockout streak continued right through to the summer of 1981. By that time, he had accumulated a record of 11 wins, all by knockout against respectable opponents. This is pretty. You look at it, you just hear the sounds of his record. So Mike Baker, don't know the guy, but 35, 14 and 1. Not a bad record at all. Pat Halasi, 26, 6 and 1. And Jerry Cheatham, who was 31, 5 and 2. They are not no mugs, these fellas, and he literally blazed them. And not only that, he was a young boy blazing these big men. And in his 8th professional fight against a guy called Jose Luis Baltazar, who was a bit of a poor record, or average record, which was 30 wins, 29 losses, and 2 draws, he actually spat on Baltazar, literally after flooring him in 2 rounds, because he allegedly assaulted the Ayalas before the bout.
Oh my God. So his violence outside of the ring is inside of the ring legally, but then why the fuck is he spitting on his opponents at this point? Why is he doing that? This is trouble straight away. This signals the sort of path this guy's going to go down. Of course it is. Now, Mario Maldonado, who was 11, 7 and 1, was his next opponent, and after he knocked Ayala down, he jumped up like Aaron Pryor and shouted at his opponent before returning fire and going on to knock him out a few rounds later. A story we've said about Aaron Pryor in one of his fights, when he got knocked down pretty early, he basically bounced back up and went on to stop his opponent. And this is exactly what Tony Ayala did. Now again, we're going back to the author of Sport in Blood, Carlos Acevedo. He describes Ayala's boxing style as that of Roberto Duran, and he said in his book, he was a fearsome body puncher with a natural left hook and thudding power. He forced a frenetic pace in the ring. What separated Ayala from the average pressure fighter, however, was a knack for slipping punches on the way in. This, to Rito, who was elusive at times, occasionally played the matador.
That is a great description of basically, he was about very much like a Roberto Duran there, where he's fighting on the inside, an aggressive fighter, but yet can still evade shots coming his way. He was as ferocious in the ring as he was out of it. There's no doubt about it. He was a great fighter to watch, and people loved it. Ayala appeared on the cover of the 1981 issue of KO magazine as one of tomorrow's champions, along with guys such as Alex Ramos, Bobby Cruz, and Johnny Bumpus. In his 14th fight, he would get his first taste of national exposure as he appeared on the undercard of Sugar Ray Leonard versus Thomas Hearns. Ayala produced an impressive performance, scoring a first-round knockout over Jose Bascuendo, who was 37 and 1 in the outdoor arena in Caesars Palace, Las Vegas. It was the fight that showcased his talent to the boxing world, as demonstrated that he could live up to that hype. Now, the Associated Press and United Press International called Ayala the heir apparent to the junior middleweight title.
Well, this is where, you're starting to see that inside of the ring he's such a talent that he's potentially going to go on to become a world champion at this point in time. Boxing fans could see that this guy, as ferocious as he was inside and outside of the ring, he was certainly destined to go on to become a world champion. For all his raw talent in the ring, his deranged behaviour out of it continued, and it was around this time that Tony Jr. moved to New Jersey, where he could be near his promotional team, who were the Duvers, in order to get away from what they called an unhealthy environment at his home in San Antonio. Interestingly enough, it's been reported that this move coincided with another bizarre disturbance where Ayala vandalised his neighbour's house while drunk. Then on October the 19th, 1981, he featured in a cover story of Sports Illustrated as a rising star in boxing. Many respected experts in boxing were waxing lyrical of this tremendous young kid that will soon become a superstar within that issue. His co-manager, Lou Duver, said, "Forget Sugar Ray Leonard, forget Marvin Hagler, and forget Mike Tyson. Rocky Marciano and Tony Ayala were the guys. Not even Muhammad Ali had it quite like those two." Bob Arum called Ayala the best fighter he had ever seen. Now, how many times have you heard that before? And Angelo Dundee said, "There's no telling what he can do. He is going to become a world champion."
Wow. I mean, you can't get much bigger than some of those names in there. And, for Lou Duver to say that not even Muhammad Ali had it quite like Ayala Jr. and Rocky Marciano is some statement. I mean, he was clearly making waves, and they just it was just a matter of time, as you say. It was just absolutely a matter of time. As Angelo Dundee said, he's going to be a world champion. Now, the crazy part of all this was that Ayala Jr., while still on probation, that 10-year probation from that assault or attempted rape on that poor young girl in that movie, The Toilet. So he's still on a probation. He actually had been arrested 4 days prior to release of the Sports Illustrated issue for breaking into yet another home. This is one thing this is just the tip of the iceberg with this guy and loving to break into people's homes. Now, he was actually caught by police in the property under the influence of alcohol with the home owner's possessions in his pockets. Charges were dropped when the owner of the house accepted a $3,000 payment in exchange for dropping all charges. I'm guessing a certain, maybe a Bob Aaron, maybe the Doovers, whoever it was, is lining some of these guys or some of these victims' pockets.
Well, like I said earlier, it's probably easier for them to pay off a very small fee because this is chump change for these guys. These guys that are making, Absolutely. How much money are they making on fighters like Ayala at this point, who has just been in Sports Illustrated, who's being compared to some of the greatest fighters of a generation? And yet $3,000 for him being pissed up in somebody else's house, essentially looking like he's trying to rob the place, is absolutely nothing for them. Now, in terms of his boxing career, Ayala Jr. continued to blast his way through all opponents, and by August the 1st, 1982, he had amassed a career record of 20 wins and 17 knockouts. His next victim was Robbie Epps, who was 30-2, who had been talking a lot of shit about the Ayalas prior to the fight, which, of course, enraged Ayala. He knocked Epps down but continued to beat him while he was on the deck, with the referee and his corner jumping in to actually try and restrain the crazed Ayala, but he somehow managed to avoid being disqualified even in that fight, even though the guy was on the floor and he's beating the shit out of him.
This is a crazy story, and apparently like Lou Dover's in there and they're literally trying to manhandle him off of this guy. He's giving this Robbie Epps an absolute pounding. Hits the deck and he just keeps hitting him. He doesn't stop. And again, I mean, it's a straight up disqualification. We have some of these strange stories where someone gets disqualified and you're like, was he going down? This is a straight up disqualification. He's just literally hammered this kid because of shit he's been saying about him. So you don't fucking say that about the Ayalas if you're going to step in the ring with Tony Jr. because he's just going to beat the living shit out of you, to be quite honest with you. So moving on, the New York Times then reported in the same month, on August 22nd, 1982, that Ayala would enter a clinic for a minimum of 28 days in an attempt to solve his emotional and substance misuse problems. Although he did not confess to using heroin during this intervention, he was basically just saying he's doing everything else but heroin. Now, it just seemed that everyone involved with Ayala Jr., as we keep alluding to, refused to accept that his behaviour outside was a problem. Now, his promoter, Dan Duva, one of those that basically, whether he could see the warning signs or he just refused to accept them, he said this: Tony has a drinking problem, but it's not as if he needs to drink. The problem is that he can't drink. It's like firewater. He was brought up in an old-fashioned Mexican home that's colliding with the present reality. He definitely has emotional problems. He is not a criminal. He doesn't need to be put in jail. Now, that couldn't be the most bizarrest comment I've ever heard from anybody when we're doing these dark side of boxing. And Dan Duva is a guy, he was respected. I think he passed away, didn't he? And we did speak about Dan Duva when we was doing another dark side of boxing. But for him to turn around and say that he wasn't a criminal, I'm confused by that comment. I really don't understand that.
I don't understand that comment either. It seems like he's not wanting to accept the fact that Ayala has some serious issues. Now, bearing in mind that these guys don't know about the molestation earlier on in his life. No one knows about it because it didn't come out until after the crimes that Ayala goes on to commit. So nobody knows why he's behaving this way. They just think he's probably a can short of a six-pack, and that's probably how they see him. So they refuse to accept it. They blame it on culture. They blame it on his upbringings, the Mexican home, stereotypical Mexican home. That's basically what he's putting it down to. So yeah, I think he's sitting there with his rose-tinted spectacles on Danduva at this point, and probably thinking, yeah, it's something we can probably manage. You know, he's not an alcoholic. He likes to drink, but he doesn't rely upon it. That's just someone who's in denial about a person in my eyes. Now, if Ayala Jr. had not been a potential star, he certainly would have been in jail by this point.
Yep.
And that's with the arrests we've managed to source on record. There were many more that he actually admitted to, Tony Ayala Jr., so it goes to show you that he was being looked after very well by his handlers to keep him out of the nick. So after a few days being checked into rehabilitation, his San Antonio home was actually hit by gunfire, not once, but twice in the same night. And the Associated Press said, for the second time in 24 hours, shotgun blasts struck the vacant home of Tony Ayala, the undefeated junior middleweight, who is scheduled to begin treatment Wednesday in California for emotional and drinking problems. Now, he was not home early Monday, nor shortly before midnight Monday when the neighbours reported buckshot being fired at his home. So something's happening there. He's pissed somebody off somewhere, certainly for his home to be targeted, although he wasn't there. Now, reporters actually got wind of what happened and were at the property to get a story when Ayala Sr. arrived on the scene. And he was quoted as saying, "Thanks to you people, this is what happens." Tony Jr. had hit rock bottom by this point and was starting to contemplate suicide. He said, "I definitely considered suicide. It was an option. I stuck the barrel of a gun in my mouth. My wife had left me. I was playing with a loaded .22 with a full clip. I just stuck it in my mouth. Some people will be sad that I didn't do it."
I'm one of them, to be honest with you. I'm not gonna lie. It probably sounds a bit harsh now, but you'll see if you don't know this story. And I mean, this geezer there's something not going on. I mean, the gunshots are nice. What the hell's that about? And his dad as well. So thanks to you again, blaming somebody else, blaming the reporters for being on the scene to get a story. It sounds pretty much as you described brilliantly, Sean. With Senior, he tends to blame a lot of other people. And the fact that one thing we haven't mentioned, you know, he does in that quote where you said he's committed, he was going to commit suicide, and his wife had left him. He actually did get married to his wife, is also something we haven't mentioned, when he was 18 years old. So, I mean, this guy is a very young guy, and what he's already lived to this point is literally almost like a full life, isn't it? I mean, it's crazy. It really is. Now, Ayala was now in line for a shot at the big time. I mean, with everything that's going on, he's checked into rehab. He's ready to commit suicide. You know, he's getting his San Antonio home's being attacked. He's almost got done for rape. He's invading people's houses, but yet he's scheduled to meet Roberto Duran on November 19, 1982. But the fight was called off after Duran lost to Kirkland Lang on September 4th. Now, Kirkland's victory obviously was named the upset of the year. Now, with Duran now off the table, attentions had to turn elsewhere. And on November 20th, 1982, when Ayala fought a replacement in the form of Argentinian Carlos Herrera, who had another good record of 47-6, the WBA's number one ranked junior middleweight contender in a title eliminator. Now, Ayala won by a third round knockout at the Convention Hall in Atlantic City and became the mandatory challenger for the WBA champion, who was at the time, it was Davey Moore, and he was on the cusp of earning himself $750,000 payday.
Wow.
Now, Ayala was a huge favourite, with some suggesting that it was basically a matter of time. And he was also being compared, you know, with it being the early 80s, they were, well, not compared, they were looking at that he would be a part of that beautiful foursome of Duran, Hearns, Hagler and Leonard. People really believed that if Ayala we're not going to quite give too much away, but if Ayala had have taken this fight and he had been a world champion, that he would be in a position to be fighting these guys. It was no surprise that he ended up on the front cover of the December 1982 issue of The Ring with the caption, "Boxing's Bad Boy."
He was just so close to getting that opportunity to become a part of that particular era. There were so many other fighters that could have been a part of that so-called Fab Four. The likes of Wilfred Benitez, who I think was probably the closest to becoming part of that, making it a Fab Five. And then you've got the likes of Aaron Pryor, who we've covered before. The likes of, obviously, Ayala. So Ayala was so close to getting himself into prime position. And, it just makes you wonder what would have happened, of course. And the Ring's caption of Boxing's Bad Boy, well, it couldn't have been more accurate as we move into what is now the terrifying side of a psychopath. Now, on the evening of New Year's Eve 1982, Tony Jr. and his wife Lisa, both 19 at the time, were at their home in New Jersey bickering about what to do for the evening, which ended with Lisa walking out. Now, she returned later to an empty house, but moments later, Tony called her. "Lisa, get ready. I'm coming to get you. We're going out." Lisa knew instantly that Tony had scored some cocaine and heroin just by the tone of his voice, an ongoing battle that resulted in many of their breakups. They ended up on a ferry boat that had been converted into a restaurant and bar, seeing out the new year until 3:30 a.m. Tony, of course, was well over the limit, but yet he still drove them both home, and they both arrived after 4 a.m. Tony told Lisa that he was going back down to the car to get his cigarettes, and was gone long enough for Lisa to go outside and call for him. Now, Tony did come stumbling back up the stairs, blabbering nonsense, as his wife recalled. "Lisa, you're not going to believe it. I just saw the devil." Now, while his wife slept, Tony went back to his car to get more cigarettes, which was parked in front of an apartment rented by a 30-year-old school teacher. Tony had seen her around, but he didn't know her. It was in the early hours of the morning on New Year's Day in 1983 when a highly intoxicated Tony Ayala Jr. broke into his neighbour's home, tied her up and raped her at knife point. Within the court transcripts, his victim's horrifying ordeal was described in detail, and it said, "She is woken up by the sound of her bedroom doorknob opening. She could see him by the light of her clock radio. He entered by cutting a screen and going through the kitchen window. His victim described how he had a knife, he ripped away her nightgown, he cut her underwear off with the knife, he ties her to the bed using her knee socks, and he rapes and sodomizes her."
What the fuck, mate? I'm just... Every time I've read that, I've typed it, and I've just heard you speak that, Sean, it is absolutely horrific. I mean, that poor woman. They're just the way it's described it, from those transcripts with the doorknob being open. That's what she woke up to, and that light and the radio clock and just seeing his shadow. This geezer is a fucking monster. This is just absolutely horrific what he does to this poor girl. Now, not done with this horrifying ordeal, Ayala wakes up his victim's roommate, who was in the next room, and threatened to kill you both if you call the police. Before returning to his traumatized victim, he actually went back and raped her again. The roommate managed to escape through the first floor bedroom window and called for help. Ayala was later found roaming the Rosemount Manor apartments and arrested by the New Jersey State Police. And when they actually found him as well, they were asking what he was doing. He was just saying, "Getting me cigarettes." And the reason he fitted the description. And also the other thing, which was actually just another grim point, was that the roommate actually, she said the one thing you noticed with him is when he came into the room is how badly he smelled of alcohol. And that was half of the reason. Not only did he fit the description, but he stunk dreadfully of alcohol. I mean, he drove home that night as well, and he almost killed them both on the way home. I wish he killed himself, not Lisa, but I wish he killed himself, that's for sure. Absolutely grim. Just an awful description. And I just, it's something that stuck with me. I don't think I'd ever leave me, to be quite honest with you. That is just absolutely horrific. That poor woman.
Absolutely disgraceful what he did, what act he committed. It's just, why? You just start to think to yourself, why? What reason? Yes, we know that he'd attacked the girl at 18 years old a few years earlier. We know that. We know he was on probation for that attack. We know that. But to go that one step further, I suppose the warning signs are coming, really, aren't they? When we're talking about when he was arrested for being in a neighbour's home and trying to nick his personal possessions and then getting bailed out with $3,000 payment to that particular neighbour. I think the warning signs were already there, but you wouldn't have known it at the time. At that moment in time, you probably wouldn't have thought of it like that. In hindsight, when looking back at it and going through that description and that transcript, straight away you start to think to yourself, no, the writing was on the wall for this. I honestly can't believe that this even happened. His brother, Mike, actually spoke at the moment he heard the news of what his brother did, and he said, I was in New York and one of my friends called me and said, did you hear? And it's a feeling that I can't describe. It's a feeling like I feel now, like a numbness. So even his brother, how much did that affect the Ayala family, first and foremost? Well, of course, it affected him a lot. And within 15 days, this sick bastard was released on a $75,000 bail, and his team attempted to weave their magic. Now, on January the 8th, 1983, Team Ayala attained a state government official member as an attorney because in Texas law, there is a requirement that if you can attain such a member, that you must wait until 30 days after the judicial session is over for that case to progress. In turn, it would have delayed the case until June 1983, giving Ayala the chance to fight for his world title while the case was pending.
That is just, I'm sorry. I mean, this is what I'm talking about with the people there. But that just sends shivers down my spine as well. The fact he gets out $75,000 bail, they try to get this government senator involved because, you know, these guys are educated. They know the system. Texas law would require it to delay it. And all they're thinking of is pay for all these, you know, these wealthy attorneys, give them as much money as they need, get him out so then they can get him a title shot so they can earn a few million. And then, fuck knows, whatever happens to him. Again, these guys around him are they're almost as sick as he is because you just wash your hands of this piece of shit. I mean, what on earth? This guy needs to go down for a long time. And it gets worse. Ayala's attorney, William DeMarco, one of those absolute arseholes, to be quite honest with you, a fucking, just a piece of shit. And he tried to prove to the court that she had actually consented to sex. And he actually said in court, there was a reason why she didn't resist because she was a willing participant with what happened. He meets a girl. The morality of what happened isn't our decision. And look how easy it is to point the finger. I mean, this geezer's in a court of law.
What is he on?
Oh, mate. He's obviously, you know, he's trying to sway the jury, isn't he? And DeMarco didn't stop there. And he also attacked the victim's friend, that girl that jumped out from the first floor to save her mate. Some people might have said she probably should have run and fucking stabbed the wanker, but she, you know, she's a frightened girl. She's run off and tried to save it. Well, anyway, he's attacked her as well, claiming that the charges against the client were a result of her being a nosy woman who called the police when she couldn't figure out what was going on behind closed doors with her roommate, which is nobody's business. I mean, this geezer's statements here in a court of law is just grim, and what a prick. What an absolute arsehole.
It just gets worse, doesn't it? I mean, I know attorneys are there to defend a client, of course, but there's defending a client and there's absolutely twisting the truth to the reality of the situation, which is, I suppose, what these bastards get paid for, of course. I mean, not all of them are like that, we know that, but there are some of them out there. I think William DeMarco was certainly one of them bastard lawyers. Now, thankfully, the legislation tactic did not work, and Tony Ayala Jr. was eventually convicted of burglary, aggravated sexual assault, 2 counts of possession of a knife for unlawful purposes, threatening to kill, and terroristic threats on April the 20th, 1983.
Yay! Fucking send that cunt away, throw away the key. Sorry, I dropped the seatbelt. This is what I'm saying. Sorry, I just dropped the seatbelt, and I'll never do that on any of these pods. But this is just how much this geezer gets under my skin. I'm sorry.
Well, the judge, Amos C. Saunders, gave the court his verdict while addressing the court, and he said, "The future was his. Unfortunately, under the handsome exterior, there seems to be another Antonio Ayala. Mr. Ayala is a definite threat to society, and especially the women in our society. The circumstances of his crime are certainly one of extreme violence and depravity. This happened on the victim's birthday. For the rest of her life, whenever she celebrates her birthday, she will remember that night of terror. I mean, I didn't know it was on her birthday. To make it worse, not only did he fucking rape her and terrorise her, he did it on her fucking birthday. So this poor bastard woman has now got to live with this for the rest of her life.
Oh, it's just every time, the further you dig into this, it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's such an awful thing, but for the judge to even just throw in that poor girl sitting there, her family's there, and he just brings up it's her birthday, just probably should have just left that bit alone. I mean, whenever she celebrates her birthday, she remember that night of terror. I mean, no, that's just awful, isn't it? I mean, I'm laughing because I just think for a judge to say that, I mean, again, I mean, some of these people, I do wonder. They're educated people, apparently, and some of these people were just saying the most bizarre things. And just 19 years of age and on the brink of absolute superstardom. I mean, you couldn't get any more higher than where he was ready to go. Tony Ayala Jr. was sentenced to 15 to 35 years, where he served just the bare minimum of 16 years at Railway State Prison and Trenton State Prison. Now, a few months into his bird, Tony hit bottom. He hit the bottom. He was on an absolute downward spiral. Unfortunately, he didn't kill himself. Unfortunately, this is what he said. I'd been smoking dope and was watching MASH on TV. Very funny show. I was laughing my ass off. Then I thought, man, look at you. You're in this hellhole, this dungeon, and you're enjoying yourself. I decided then, you've either got to change or die. He called his father and asked for permission to kill himself. Tony Sr. confirmed this in a story, and he said, I said, son, you have my blessing, but you should know I'm coming right behind because I don't want to live in a world without you. Well, I wish they fucking did it, the pair of them, to be quite honest with you, because they just make me sick. I'll never ever say anything like that, but they don't belong in this world, mate. They are just pure fucking evil. I can't get, this isn't the end. It just gets fucking worse. It is just absolutely horrific.
Now, by August 1983, Tony Jr. begins counselling with Brian Raditz, the prison's director of psychology and psychiatry, and he spoke of a breakthrough in sessions with this sick, twisted individual, saying Tony could relate to me because I'd been an athlete. But what really brought us together was our closeness to our fathers. Sometimes when things really started to happen for him in therapy, I'd see Tony 4 to 6 hours at a time. I'd never seen anyone work at it like he did. He read everything he could get his hands on. He was into theory of psychology, group therapy. And at some point, we became close enough that I could say, Tony, what's really wrong? What really hurts? Tony Jr. spoke of the abuse, and when he did, the pressure was off him. He could begin to deal with himself constructively. Now, Raditz said that the sexual abuse he suffered confused his sexuality, and Tony Jr. believes that this was the reason for him committing the rape. And he says, in his own words, I wanted to impose myself on a woman as my way of proving my straightness. My heterosexuality, which goes back to me being abused, being sodomized, being pushed into things that I didn't want to do and blaming myself, thinking somehow I invited this situation. It's such a compelling statement from him, really, because on one hand, you really feel sorry for him. You really feel sorry for the fact that he had to suffer that type of abuse as a child. But then, in the same sense, you think to yourself, what a bastard. How could you then justify that as a reason to want to rape somebody else by wanting to impose yourself? He used the word imposed on somebody else. Why does that make it right? That doesn't make it right. I sympathise with him wholeheartedly on what he suffered. But in the same sense, that does not justify him the reason to go and rape somebody. So in that respect, that comment that he made was just ridiculous and just the biggest bunch of horseshit you've ever heard.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, mate. It's one of them ones where, I mean, there's, it absolutely awful what he went through as a child. He now he knows how that feels. For him to then go on and rape someone is beyond me. He wants to impose himself on a woman. He's married, and I mean, we're going to get, the fact is as well. I mean, he's in prison for rape. He has denied it, but and then he does admit it in a minute. But Tony and Lisa actually got married in a prison chapel because they thought it was important to make it official. So yeah, Lisa actually married him. I believe that they were married and then got divorced and then they married again. I think it was like a remarriage. They split up so many times. It's difficult to keep up with it. And to be quite honest, I got bored of trying to figure it out. But at this time, and as time wore on, Lisa did become troubled. This is what she said. She said, he was my husband, and that's just how it was. But for 2 or 3 years, I went on believing in his innocence, that he had been wrongly convicted. I couldn't bring myself to believe that he had done this horrible thing. Finally, I asked him, and he said, yes, Lisa, I did it. In the end, she had had enough, and basically she said it was it. And it's an awful life, she says. 6 years of that was all I could handle. I wanted to go to a movie with a companion. I wanted a normal relationship. So I divorced him. She actually sent him the divorce papers on his birthday in 1989.
Yes.
Which I thought was a great touch. And unfortunately for Lisa, she'd be back again, and she would continue to be back with Tony, and they would continually be splitting up. I thought if she'd have just left it there, sent in the divorce papers, and he signed it on 1989 on his birthday, I mean, that'd have been a great way to leave it. But no, she does come back, unfortunately.
Silly, silly, silly woman. That's all I'm going to say there. Now, Tony also spoke with the New York Times in a 1998 prison interview and referred to his molestation as the reason for his conviction once again, by this time saying, looking back, that was ground zero of what set everything on its course. I don't blame everything on that because I made the decisions to do the things I did, but it explains why I did what I did. Tony Ayala Sr. also spoke about his son and what happened to him while he was in prison, and he said, demons hounded him throughout his life, and when he used drugs and alcohol he just exploded. When my son was incarcerated, I didn't come out of my house for 3 months. There is an old saying that everybody makes firewood out of a fallen tree. That's what happened. I went broke. My wife and I lost everything. Everything. So I went back on the road. Emmanuel Stewart, an old friend, gave me work at the Kronk Gym in Detroit, and then we opened the Kronk West in Tuscan. We were away for 11 years, but we're not strangers. We've been in rough seas before. So, yet again, in this interview in 1998, Tony Ayala, he's kind of trying to set the reasons for why he is the way he is. And again, as I said earlier, in some respects, I can understand why he's saying that, because what happened to him has, of course, put him in that trajectory. Of course it has. However, he knew right from wrong. Everybody knows right from wrong. He was brought up to know right from wrong. Yes, his dad was a bit of a bastard and a bit of a disciplinarian, but he was taught right from wrong. And what he did was way wrong, way past the line. Nothing can justify it. And his dad, he's just got this undying love for his son. And no matter what his son has done, no matter what he's been through, he's still got his back, no matter what. And it's crazy to think that he still had his back for all that time as well.
Yeah, his dad and his wife. I mean, he's still got these two people in his life. And for me as well was when he actually described sitting there watching MASH and laughing, and this poor woman is raped. I mean, that's my image. That's what I'm thinking of, then poor victim and the other girl that he beat the shit out of at 15 years old, and he's sitting there watching MASH and laughing. This geezer, this is why I think. I mean, he shouldn't be put down or anything, but he should at least be in prison and stay in prison for the rest of his life. But unfortunately, it's not the case. And in April 1999, Ayala was actually released on parole. A month later, Tony and Lisa remarried, and he was able to resume his boxing career at the age of 36 with Brian Ratties, that the psychologist who basically, I believe, just see the pay dollars, because he actually worked in a prison as Ratties for a little while and then left, but still kept, he done his own like private thing, and he still kept in contact with Lisa and Tony, and funny enough, he became his manager. I can't help but think with Ratties and some of the stuff that he says, that he see a paycheck there and he sees some potential money. I mean, that's just my observation. And if you look at some of the quotes that he says, I think you'd probably be agreeing with me. And now many other managers and promoters were also eager to sign Tony Ayala Jr. on his return, sort of coming out of prison after 16 years when he returned to the ring, but not Bob Arum. So this is Bob Arum. It was a treat to watch him in the ring because he fought with such pent-up fury. He would knock a guy down and spit on him before he went to his corner. With rehabilitation, who knows how much of that ferocity is going to be left.
Oh
What a
my
fucking
God.
arsehole.
So Bob Arum is what he's basically saying there is he preferred the Tony Ayala that was beating the shit out of his opponents when they were down, spitting on them when they were on the ground as well. But instead, he thinks he's just a washed-up fighter who's not going to be the same as he once was. So he's basically not interested in him anymore. That just says all it needs to say about Bob Arum, of course. Now, going back to Ayala and his return to the ring, he actually picked up a whopping $750,000 contract, and he actually sold out San Antonio's Freeman Coliseum on August the 20th, 1999, arriving as a conquering hero. Would you be surprised that everybody welcomed him back as a conquering hero, knowing that he raped somebody? Now, Lester Bedford remembered the moment against Manuel Esparza, who was 19-5-1, and he says, "That was the most electric entrance of a fighter that I've ever witnessed. I looked up and saw people with tears in their eyes." Now, Ayala finished off his opponent in the third round and went on to win his next 4 fights against credible opposition, all by knockout. It seemed only a matter of time again until he'd end up getting pushed into title contention and potentially becoming one of the sport's biggest stars. I actually can't fathom the fact at this point that this guy's committed a crime, a terrible crime, and yet people are acting like he's the victim in all of this.
It's crazy, isn't it? And some people, we could have gone on with some of these quotes as well. Some of the quotes I did find online where people were sort of saying he's done his 16 years, he's done it. He's a changed man. Let's give him a chance.
What the fuck?
Oh no, there's some real murky characters out there, I tell you. And some, again, I mean, this shows you the difference with some boxing fans and how fickle boxing fans are. Our time people just forget, and how quickly they can forget, and they can say one thing and then all of a sudden, a few years later, they forgot what they said. That's a common factor, especially on social media, isn't it? So all these fights were in the hometown of Texas, and every arena was a sellout. Now, after winning his 5th bout of his comeback, Ayala was once again back in the hunt for that world title and given a chance to fight the former world champion, Luis Ramon Yogi Boy Campos, who was 74-4 in a world title eliminator in the summer of 2000. Now, this was a brutal fight, and it was literally they pulverized each other. And Tony Ayala actually ended up losing his undefeated record when he had to retire in his corner after the 8th, because according to ESPN telecast, Ayala broke his left hand in round 3. And a distraught Ayala cried out, I'm sorry," while sitting on his stool. Ayala reflected on this fight sometime after, saying, "It never crossed my mind to stop the fight. I was on the ropes, blocking myself with my shoulder. He's punching me all over, and I'm thinking, you punk motherfucker, you can't even knock me out." I'll tell you what, I could imagine a lot of people that would have loved to have knocked him out.
Well, let's just say this then takes another turn for Tony Ayala's career and his life, and we go back to the darker, psychotic side of Tony Ayala. So following that defeat to Yuri Boy Campos, his demons, of course, was bound to resurface. He'd just taken his first defeat of his professional career, one step closer or one step away from a title shot, and that was gone yet again. It wasn't long before he was back in that prison cell again, following an incident where police were called on December the 12th, 2000. Once again, Ayala broke into his neighbour's house, this time of a young student, Nancy Gomez, who was living with her friend Sandra Gutierrez and her husband John. Ayala actually knew Nancy from his time in the local gym, and he had a clear intention of sexual assault on his mind. This time, however, he was actually shot in the left shoulder by Nancy as he went to make advances. So this time, she must have been prepared for him. She must have been prepared for him, I'm telling you. She must have knew, living next door to that bastard, I'm going to have a gun to my side just in case this guy decides to want to creep into our house. Now, the author and award-winning journalist John Albert spoke with Sandra and her husband John about the invasion into their home. And this is what was wrote in his article, 12 Rounds to Hell. According to Sandra, on the night of the shooting, Nancy had suddenly woke Sandra, pulling her off the bed and saying, "There's someone in the house." Sandra quickly retrieved a handgun and went to investigate, while Nancy huddled in the corner with Sandra's young son. Sandra recalls how she crept into the living room and spotted a black-clad figure pressed against the wall near the kitchen. And in her words, she said, "I cocked the gun and said, "Don't you move, motherfucker. I'll shoot you where you stand." He stood up and said, "Don't shoot me, baby." I yelled out for Nancy to call the cops, and when she hung up and came back, I told her, "It's Tony Ayala." He said that he wanted to talk, and that he'd knocked on the front door and nobody answered. I said, "Well, that doesn't mean fucking come through my window."
I do love Sandra. I think she's got her wits about her, hasn't she? And so this is the situation. So Isla's there now, standing in the whatever room he's broke into, and he's now at gunpoint. And Sandra says she told Nancy to grab a pair of pants for her, and then handed the teen the gun. And this is Sandra. She said, "I told her if that motherfucker moves, you shoot him. I'm putting one pant leg," and he's telling her, "You're not going to shoot me. After everything I've done for you, we're friends." The cops are on their way. So he says, "I'm just going to leave." He moves forward and I tell her, "Shoot." And she shot him. He hits the floor and says, "I can't believe you shot me. What the fuck's wrong with you?" The cops were pounding on the door, so Nancy gave me the gun and went to let them in. I'm trying to fix the gun because a bullet is caught in there. He's laying on the floor and all these cops come storming through the house. I'm still fucking with the gun, and finally I'll give it to the cops. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I love Sandra, and good job that she fucking shot him. Well done, Nancy.
Oh, I tell you, absolute heroes of this story, aren't they? Heroes of the story
Brilliant.
so far. I can't believe he even come in and had the right to go in somebody else's house. He clearly was going to go and fucking rape one of them. He was clearly going to go and rape one of them. Why the fuck was he in there again? Come on, let's be honest. It's an
If you knock on someone's door at 3:30 in the morning and then they don't answer, you don't then decide to climb through their window, do you? I mean,
No.
that is a bit. End of the day, he's in their ass, and the fact that he's even tried to step towards Nancy and she says shoot, she shoots him. Apparently, just above the art, unfortunately, but great shot.
Now, at the trial, Ayala's lawyer asked why I was so frantically trying to fix the gun. Would I have shot to kill him? And I said, yeah, I would have. His mouth alone and the way he looked at you breaking in and my daughter screaming, that shit was going through my head. Her husband shakes his head and says, Ayala got lucky. The clip that was in the gun usually has hollow points. He was one lucky bastard, basically. He was very lucky that he didn't get killed that night. Sandra is an absolute legend. Absolute legend. Now, this is Ayala now talking about what happened, and he spoke about this break-in, and this is what he said. The one girl I don't try to fuck is the one that ends up shooting me. But I messed up. It wasn't cool of me to go there at 3 a.m. drunk, and it was stupid to go in the house. Forget about the fact that it was open. I used extremely poor judgment, and I don't make any excuses for that. Disturbingly, another plea deal was agreed where Ayala had to accept a charge of 2 counts of aggravated assault, and he served just 90 days house arrest and ended up with another 10-year probation.
What the hell? Has this geezer allowed back into society? Whether he's on a tag or not, it makes no difference. And there was also another part of this where we could have gone into where he was moaning at the fact that he wanted to go to another state to fight with his tag on. And then the Texas law, they said no. Basically said, no, you can't. You're under a house arrest. This guy's still wanting to fight. He has just... everything's about him and how everyone's sort of against him, and this geezer's just a pile of shit. I mean, 10 years probation and under 90 days house arrest. He should have gone down. I mean, he's just been done for rape. What's he doing breaking in someone's house? It just doesn't make any sense. And again, by May 2002, he's back in the ring again, knocking out a guy called Urbano Gruello, who was 18-8. In 2 rounds in Randy's Ballroom in San Antonio, which sounds like a dive of a place. Now, 4 months later, Ayala knocked out Lee Fortune, who was 22-20-2 in 5 rounds. 2 years later, Ayala was arrested for having sex with a 14-year-old minor on 2 separate occasions. But by January 7, 2003, all charges were dropped.
What?
The young girl was actually accused of lying because of a previous case where she made up charges against her stepfather due to her being mad at him. I don't know, mate. I'm lost. This poor girl's in the courtroom and she's having to testify saying she openly had sex with him, but she was a 14-year-old minor. He denied ever having sex with her. But basically, they made her look bad, and it was her word against him. And they made her look bad because they pulled up, this old court charges where she made up this molestation with her stepfather. So basically, she wasn't a credible witness, and that was the reason why he got off. So he's having sex with a 14-year-old girl twice and still gets away with it. Insane.
Well, this gets even worse now, because this is what he had to say next. With the last trial, they kept saying that nothing has changed about me, when the reality is everything's changed about me. I don't lose control and beat people up the way I used to. I don't break into people's houses and rape women anymore like I used to. He paused. Not that I ever raped more than one woman. Look, I understand that people want to feel that it's safe to go to sleep at night without worrying somebody's going to break in. I agree with that. I'm a homeowner. I check my doors and make sure everything's locked up. I'm no different than anybody else, and it hurts me to think that I am. What the fuck is this statement? Seriously? I cannot believe.
I'm laughing because it's the fluency of the guy that wrote that article, and the way he must have got this on recorder, and the way he just, I don't rape women anymore. Like, by the way, I did only rape one, so God knows. I mean, by the sounds of it, I think he probably has raped a couple more. I'm guessing. Yeah, he's probably broke into a lot more properties. There are a lot more arrests when he was considered a minor, which they paid off, which, in that state of Texas, he's a minor. They're not going to have all these records. You just can't find them. You're not going to be able to source them online anyway, unless you actually go to the state and into a library and pull this information off. But he falls into his own trap there. He clearly just indicates just the sort of predator he was and how much of a disgusting human being. And I'm laughing because it's just so bad that this guy is just able to do and say these things, and it's clear to everybody he's an absolute monster.
I'm telling you, I cannot believe that he thought that was a reasonable statement to make. And you're laughing about it because you can't believe it just as much as I can't believe it. He's basically indicating that, I don't rape women anymore. I can't get over it. I really can't get over that. He thinks it's acceptable.
I just have sex with 14-year-old girls instead.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That's an easier way to get around it. Instead, I'll just go with a minor instead. That's just my way of doing things these days. So Ayala now is 39 years of age, and he's been in custody since the arrest in December 2002, and of course denied the statutory rape allegation after State District Judge Maria Teresa Hurt ordered Tony Jr. to be freed from jail. His father, of course, was overjoyed and was quoted as saying, "You know the saying, the truth will set you free." Well, Ayala Sr. was certainly fucking wrong about his son. His lead attorney, Jimmy Parks, said, "When you're facing these kinds of ramifications, 10 years in prison with so little of your boxing career left, and maybe you'll be able to fight for a title, obviously it's a great relief for Tony Ayala." That title shot was for the vacant, very lightly regarded IBA World Super Middleweight title against Anthony Bonsante, who was 22-3-3 on April the 25th, 2003 at the Thunderbird Wild West Casino in Norman, Oklahoma. In Tony Ayala's final fight of his career, this is his final fight against the former contender from Season 1, Anthony Bonsante. He was actually stopped in the 11th round after the referee had seen enough, so twice he was able to get back into the ring. Twice since 1982, since that proposed fight against Davey Moore in 1982, where he was potentially going to go on to become a world champion. Fighting Yuri Boy Campos as well when he returned in the early 2000s, and then one more potential shot at becoming a champion of some sorts, and he lost in his final fight. His second loss on his career record as well.
I would love to have seen that 11th round, because by the sounds of it, the 11th round, Bonsante was giving him an absolute pasting. He was whipping him, beating the living crap out of him for those 3 minutes, and that would have been 3 minutes I would have loved to see. So if anyone could ever source that video for me, I'd love to see it. Just to see this piece of shit get an absolute beating. And on November 15, 2003, Ayala was stopped by police for speeding and breaking his curfew before being released once again. All this being arrested, releasing and getting away with God knows what and whatever else he was doing. A year later, in 2004, he was stopped again. But this time he was arrested for speeding, driving without a license, no proof of insurance, and in possession of heroin and pornography. In 2004, Ayala was sentenced to 10 years at a private Sanders Estates unit for lower level offenders in Venus.
Lower level offenders?
oh, no. Southeast of Fort Worth, where he worked as a janitor. He was also housed at the Robertson unit in Texan's maximum security prison. So they moved him
Hey.
to a maximum security prison after, where he did serve his full term of 10 years. He did never grant any interviews or made any appearances or public statements during his second incarceration. Thankfully, we didn't have to listen to any more fucking nonsense from him.
I'm not surprised, to be honest with you, because after the last statement he made about he didn't rape women anymore and kind of trying to justify it, I think that was the right move from him at that point. The one fucking right thing he's done in his life was to keep his fucking mouth shut, because he was only going to make itself worse for him, weren't he? Now, following the death of his beloved father, Tony Ayala Jr. was then released from prison in 2014. Ayala co-owned the running of the Zara Zamora Street Gym in San Antonio with his brothers. It was in that same gym that on May the 12th, 2015, Tony Ayala Jr. was found dead due to a drug overdose. Yay! Fucking finally.
Thank God.
Finally gets his comeuppance. Now, Ayala's brother, Mike, actually spoke at his funeral, and this is what Mike had to say about his brother. My brother has paid for his trespasses against humanity, and we apologise to the victims for what has happened. He was destined for greatness, but like all of us, he fell down, and to come back was hard. I lost my brother to addiction. I am not making an excuse. I'm just offering an explanation for what he has done.
I mean, he's his brother, I suppose. There's no explanation for what he's done for me, and you can't excuse it. I'm sorry. This geezer was a piece of shit, and he does not belong in this world. I wish he died a lot sooner than he did, and hopefully he would have had less victims. God knows what's happening to that poor 14-year-old girl, that minor, and you know, the 19-year-old he beat the shit out of when he was 15, and I think he ruptured her bladder as well, which is something we didn't mention. He bashed her badly. I mean, God knows how she's doing, and that poor woman that he raped in that dreadful story. I have no sympathy for this fella, absolutely none at all. And I can sort of understand where Mike's coming from because he is his brother, but not for me at all. And Eric Benson of Texas Monthly spoke with 47-year-old former bantamweight champion who was John Michael Johnston near his home on the south side. A week after Ayala's death, Johnston had been training in the Zarzamona Street Gym since his former manager, who was Bingo King Eddie Garcia, opened it in the late 80s. And he stayed on once Tony took over and become his trainer, and a man he actually viewed almost as an adoptive father. That was when he took over for a few years from his former manager. And when Ayala once again returned from prison last year, or the year he returned, Johnston was still at the gym training for a late career comeback of his own. Johnston had struggled with addiction and blown chances himself. He was now sober and working as a foreman at a coal power plant at the time, and he saw Ayala returning to a bleak situation. And this is what Johnston said. And Johnston said something was troubling him. I would look at him and he's just pacing by himself. He then went on to speak about the last hours of Ayala's life. And this is what he said again. He said, I've been talking to some fighters from the gym, and from around 1:30 to 3:30 that morning, the morning he died, Tony actually called 6 different people. Why? He was reaching out. He needed to talk to somebody. Not a single one of those fighters that he tried to contact picked up the damn phone. And thank God for that, because he may never have overdosed, to be quite honest with you. It sounds so bad to speak ill of the dead, but this is one piece of shit. I'm glad he's dead.
Well, I think the best place to finish this episode is with a quote from Tony Ayala Jr. himself when he participated in an interview before his reincarceration with author John Albert. Ayala actually gives a real insight into his sick and twisted mind, although this is his description of how it felt to knock out an opponent in the ring. It is also matching to his harrowing mindset when preying and pouncing on his helpless victims, and this is his statement. Like God, I would imagine it's the closest thing to being like God, to control somebody else. I hit the guy and it's like I can do anything I want to you. I own you, your life is mine, and I will do with it what I please. It's a really sadistic mentality, but that's what goes on in my mind. It's really evil. There's no other way to put it. You have these other fighters and they'll never admit to that. oh, it's a sport and I'm just trying to win my fight. Well, you're winning at the expense of somebody else's health. You're trying to beat this person into submission. It's the only way I know how. I step into that dark, most evil part of me and I physically destroy somebody else and I will do with them what I want.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a matching of how he feels knocking someone out and how he felt as being that predator with them poor victims. I think that sums up Tony Ayala pretty well in that last statement of his, and just a sick individual. Look, I'm not going to deny that young child, Tony Ayala, that young boy that was molested, absolutely horrific. Some of the shit stories that he had with his dad. There were others with, he bashed them with the boxing ropes, didn't he? But end of the day, it does not give him the right to go on and do what he did. And for that reason, I have no sympathy for this man. He is an absolute, just the worst of the worst, really. I mean, all he needed to do was murder someone for me, and he would have just topped it off. That's all. He just didn't get the chance to do it. An evil person. And when he speaks of, I step into that dark, most evil part of me, and I physically destroy somebody else, oh, you can't get any more. That one line there is, for me, just sums up Tony Ayala Jr.
It's very harrowing, that statement. It really is. Got so many parallels to being a boxer in the ring and the mentality you've got in the ring to the mentality that it sounded like he was in when he was committing the crimes that he did. It's such a parallel. It's so scary. It really is so scary to hear them thoughts that he had and that statement that he made. And some of the statements that he previously made were just absolutely mind-blowing statements where you are thinking to yourself, what the fuck is this guy thinking? What is he actually thinking? Seriously, how is he trying to justify some of these actions in his own mind? And as you rightly pointed out, yes, he had a terrible couple of years when he was being molested and abused, and I do feel genuinely sorry for anybody that's had to suffer with that. But to then not be able to come out of the other side of it, there's a lot of people that are able to come out of the other side of this, become stronger as people, be able to make awareness of it for people. But Tony Ayala just went the opposite way and he became a criminal because of it. He turned it into the negative that it was and he carried on down that downward spiral. And he just got into this terrible habit in his own mind and these terrible thoughts in his own mind to go and commit them crimes that he did and scar people for life the way he did. The way he was helped by people around boxing is probably one of the other sick parts of this situation. Yeah. We mentioned it a couple of times, people that were bailing him out, people that were refusing to see what was in front of their noses. And they weren't accepting the fact that this guy, there was something not quite right with him. There was something not quite there. There was, like I said, a can short of a six-pack there, and not one person could see it. But it was funny that Bob Arum could see it when he came out of prison because he didn't want to have nothing to do with him then because he probably could see that maybe he wasn't going to go anywhere, but he probably could also see that there was definitely something not quite right about that. And Bob Arum's a man that would take anybody on, and we know that. But for him to not take Tony Ayala on after he came out of prison the first time just goes to show you that if Bob Arum wouldn't touch him with a barge pole, then even he knew there was something up with this guy. So that just goes to show you that this was a story about a guy that, again, like I said at the start of the episode, never really knew much about the story. So to hear some of the quotes, to hear some of the thoughts in this man's mind, yes, it's quite sick. And obviously we don't sit here to try and ridicule certain people. We're not here to make fun of the victim or at the victim's expense. We're here to basically tell you a story about the darker side of boxing. This is the darker side of boxing. Fighters like Tony Ayala committing these crimes outside of the ring that will go unspoken about for many years, and we're here to retell this story, and we can only be thankful that these women, some of these women were able to make it out of the other side, and hopefully they were able to go on and have pretty good, decent lives as a result of the traumatization they suffered from Tony Ayala.
Absolutely, that is we are definitely not at all, would never say anything bad about the victims. The victims are literally that, they were the victims. They just happened to have crossed paths with this absolute psychopath, and you got to laugh at just how bad he was, and some of the shit he come out with is hysterical because you just can't believe he said the things he said. It's a bit like we've done Mons on some of the stuff he come out with. I mean, these guys are psychopathic. Bob Arum at the time, I mean, was it Valero was around at this time? Also, Bob Arum was having a little piece of Valero. He's had a piece of Valero and Ayala two guys that probably pretty much the same in terms of their life and their upbringing in a way. Both absolute psychopaths, absolute psychopaths, and Ayala is absolutely up there. And Bob Arum again. I mean, he didn't look good in the Valero, and he looks worse in the Ayala one when he says "pay the damn girl off," and the fact that he's not interested in because the rehabilitation has probably taken that ferocity away from him. I mean, he liked the guy that spits on a guy when he's on the floor. They're just not shining in a good light. Bob Arum, look, end of the day, I mean, this is about Tony Ayala Jr. And I think we're brought to the light that this guy, when he come out of prison from the second stint, from that 10 years he had, no one in his own neighbourhood in San Antonio actually knew who he was. So if there's people in his state that didn't really know who he was when he come out of prison, then there certainly won't be people that will know who he is as we're doing this. And this is the point of it, to bring these guys to light. That we're literally making them nothing. They're on the brink of superstardom, and he threw it away by being an absolute monster. And that is the point. We just want to, it's a dark side of boxing. What it's about, he epitomises it, but an absolute piece of crap. I never thought I'd say it, but I am really pleased he's dead.
Well,
I can't help it. I really am. It made me smile at the end of it. It was like a happy ending.
It's not often that we sit here and condone the fact that people are passing away, but in this instance, I think it's only right that, given what the guy had done, I think we can only sort of celebrate that he didn't commit any more crimes and wasn't able to do this to anybody else at the back end of his life. So, of course, fight fans, if you've enjoyed the telling of this story, maybe not so much parts of the story itself about what Ayala did, but if you've enjoyed the way we've told this story, then of course, go and show your support by checking us out on social media at darker_side_pod on Twitter, and the BTR Boxing Podcast Network page on Facebook as well. Now, guys, if you've not checked out our newly launched Patreon page, then please head over to patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network, and you'll be able to go and support the podcast from very little to absolute amazing support. If you can spare some time to go and check that out, that would be very much appreciated. Any support is very much appreciated. We actually got one of our first patrons very recently in Tyler Dyer, who we're going to give a big shout out to for supporting the darker side of boxing. Thank you very much, Tyler, of course.
Cheers, Tyler.
Thank you for supporting the podcast and the series of podcasts. So if you've not already checked it out, please go and do so. Check it out, patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. If you've not already subscribed to the podcast, go and check us out. Apple Podcasts. Make sure you get on there if you are an Apple Podcast user. Take 5 minutes out of your day and just leave us a rating and leave us a review. It really does help us get through the Apple algorithms to get us into that top 10 of the true crime podcasting charts. Now, fight fans, you've been listening today to another darker side of boxing. The story of Tony Ayala Jr., the monstrous man that was Tony Ayala. I hope you've enjoyed this telling of the story on this episode of The Darker Side of Boxing.